Now, we will begin the second part of the Pre-Biennale. I wonder what you have thought while watching the interview videos. Now, we were able to listen to what various citizens have to say on what Seoul looked like in its long history, what the future Seoul that citizens expect would look like, and how we can make Seoul the city we want to live in. Next, we will have a talk about Seoul's past, present, and future. Indeed, well, Seoul is becoming the most trendy city around the world. So, starting with the present state of Seoul, I think it will be very interesting to hear stories about Seoul's 2,000-year-old past and Seoul's future as a global city and eco-friendly city. And furthermore, we will have a free-flowing conversation about what kind of efforts we should make for Seoul's 100 years. And now I would like to introduce you to the discussants of today's talk. First off, Byung-soo Cho, the General Director of the SBAU. And also, we have public architecture teacher in Korea, and he is indeed very famous, Hyunjun Yoo, Professor of Architecture and Urbanism at Konkik University. And next, we have Ilya Belyakov, broadcaster and interpreter in Korea. Hello. In today's talk, the past part of Seoul will be covered by director Jo Byung-soo, and the present part of Seoul will be covered by Professor Hyunjun Yoo, and the future part of Seoul will be covered by broadcaster and interpreter Ilya Belyakov. Now, let us begin. Well, in order to talk about the present part of Seoul, I believe that we need to ask some questions to Professor Yu.
So I think that there's not a city that changes so fastly like Seoul. The exterior of Seoul also fastly changes. Sometimes you walk the street and you realize that all of a sudden a new building has been built. In your view, Professor, how do you see the present-day Seoul? Well, as you just mentioned, Seoul is very fast, everything's speedy. And what this means is that the layers of the past and the layers of the present coexist. And what's interesting in my view is that, for example, if you go to Yeonhee-dong, there are the houses that were built in the 1970s, but they've been fastly commercialized into cafes. And also there's a Odeng bar that's built in the parking lot of that housing. So we have the past coexisting with the present, and new spaces have emerged. And then a year later, that space has changed once again. So you can see that there are many different layers. It's like a pie that's composed of many different layers. Yes, wow, that was a very interesting explanation about Seoul. The present and also the past coexist. We all acknowledge that, and indeed that is the present-day Seoul. But amongst the many aspects of Seoul, what is the greatest attractiveness of Seoul? Well, I think that Seoul actually can have diverse features, and also there are many creativity that you can find in Seoul. So as an architect, well, in terms of creativity, if you have to work with someone who's really rigid, then it's difficult to implement such creative ideas. But if you can bend the rules a little bit, if there's flexibility, then you can come up with many creative outcomes. For example, there's a U shape, but if we kind of tint the angle and make it into a V shape, then something very interesting come out. Yes, and also in the interview, you were on the screen, and you said that it's important to create a common memory. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Well, that comes from my personal experience back in 1994. That was the first time that I went abroad to study, and there was a Japanese friend that studied with me. And that Japanese friend, well, back then I was about 25 years old. And if you live in Korea for about 25 years, well, you continuously are educated with anti-Japanese sentiment. So when I first met that Japanese friend, you feel like you're General Lee Sun-shin, and you have this anti-sentiment towards Japan. And I felt that no matter what, I should win against this friend. But in about 2 months, I became best friends with this Japanese friend because we both didn't speak English fluently. And we continue to talk about the cartoons that we saw, Majinga Jet or Slam Dunk, for example. We grew up watching the same animations and cartoons, and I realized that we had a lot of similarities. So there were some common memories that we shared, and it was very helpful to understand one another. So I think that all in all, well, our societies might be polarized into the left and the right. But one of the reasons for that is because everyone are isolated in their own space and they don't share common memories. So within this urban space that we share, sometimes there are areas where we have to pay a fee to enter. For example, the cafes and the movie theaters, you have to buy a ticket or you have to purchase something to go into that. So you need to have these public spaces which are provided for free in order to create the common memories. Yes, so I thought that it would be good to have more open spaces. For example, the foreigners, when they visit Seoul, in the case of my friends, well, they keep asking me, why is it that so many people are cramped up in these cafes? But I think it's linked to what you just said. Yes, because we do not have the public spaces for people to enjoy that much. Yes, so then, what about creating value? The value of the city. How can you create value or create significance for the city? Well, I think that once you build the relationships, that generates value. If you look at the relationship between the people, that's very important. You also need a relationship between the people and humans. And also, the relationship between my country and me is also important as well. So you have to think about the different relationships and how you're going to create the synergy effects. That has to be in mind. The architects, I think, they are the ones who prepare the hardware for establishing such relationships. You can't just say that, oh, those two people, they're not engaging in conversations, but rather you need the right environment for them to want to really strike a conversation. For example, if there's a beautiful scenery, it would be much easier for the two people to engage in a talk, complementing the natural scenery outside. So I think that that's a role of the architect, and one of the weapons of the architect is that the walls, the windows, the staircases. Well, there are many different components of architecture that really helps people strike a conversation, engage in dialogue. Yes, listening to what you've just said, I think that the role of the architects are very important, but at the same time, I think it's really important for the citizens to enjoy the created structure and the space. So I would like to ask General Director Cho Byung-soo, what are your thoughts on this?
도시에 의미를 부여.
You mean, what are some of the ways to add value to the city? That is right. In terms of meanings and values to the city, where would you like to put more emphasis on? Significance or value? Well, preparing for this SBAU, we looked into our nature and we gave a lot of thought to the nature. Well, it seems like a simple theme, however, it is not really easy to tackle with it. And there needs to be a lot of engineering and technology incorporated there. So as an architect, it is indeed a daunting task. And usually architects, they engage in one or two projects, building projects, but then encompassing the theme of the nature is indeed very daunting. And before, I was told to prepare some stories about the past of Seoul, and I believe that here in this audience, I believe that you have a lot of ample experience and knowledge about the history of Seoul. But then, if I may, well, a few days ago, my co-worker actually looked at some of those history books, and like several dozen years back, there was this nice sand dune and a lot of natural sceneries and landscape, and it went to a lot of transformation over the past years. Well, back then, we didn't create a lot of high rise buildings. It was banned by the regulation. And when it comes to the building materials as well, well, the goal was not to keep them forever. So it was related to the circulation of the city. And as part of that, they used those materials. So if it is Han-ok Korean traditional house, then, they can build a Han-ok in more soft structural and modularized ways. But then now, in this modern contemporary world, infrastructure have become more important, and so now road infrastructure and sewage infrastructure is becoming very important. So once they are built, the society wants to keep it for as many years as possible. So there has been the change in the paradigm when it comes to using those building materials, making it more enduring and durable for a long period of time. And now, what I would like to create out of this SBAU is what is the best way to return to the nature, and what is the best way to make harmony between the nature and hard built infrastructures. And as Professor Yu said, we would like to provide more public space enjoyed and experienced by the public, and what is the best way to make that happen. So these are the areas of questions we would like to delve into. Right. So you mentioned hardware, software, architectural structures, as well as human beings all coexist together. So I believe that those are the keywords in our theme. And as you said already, General Director Cho, well, now let's move on to the second topic, Seoul's yesterday. I believe that you must thought very deeply about the theme of this. What do you think is the soulness in our Seoul's history? So as you know, our SBAU themes are mountain ranges, waterways, and wind breezes. It all started with Seoul's yesterday. So I would like to give you this question again, Director Cho. And I know that you are the one who have thought very deeply about the theme of the Biennale. Why did Seoul's 100-year master plan started from Seoul's past? Well, we started from Seoul's past. It is not that we would like to go back to what it is like in the past and build some structures that resembles like Seoul's past, but now we would like to have the modern layout, but then it is linked to Cheonggyecheon of the Han River. And as you know, in the past history of Seoul, they wanted to embrace a lot of eco aspect of it, environmental aspect of it, and there was a religious, like Confucius thought to that, and the spirit of Pungsu was also incorporated into their master plan in the past. And we're saying that Seoul enjoys 2,000 years of history. It's near 100 years, near 2,000 history. And Hanyang became the city of Korea. And before then, we had the era of Baekje, and people came to this Hanyang Seoul area more than 2,000 years ago. So now in this Biennale, we explore mountain ways, waterway, and wind breezes, a lot of hilly ways, as well as open-end areas. So as I presented in my presentation, in part one of this Pre-Biennale, we look at the eco-friendliness and topography, kind of nature, reflected into our master plan. And if we can get them all join forces together, then that will be a success. And starting from the early part of Joseon Dynasty, our ancestors looked into the topography part of it and ecology aspect of it as well. So of course, right now, we actually renew our thoughts into the 100-year master plan, and of course, we analyze and explore what has happened in the past, and in the continued spectrum, we would like to look at Seoul's past and the present. Right. It is indeed very meaningful, I guess. And I am part of the general public. I don't know anything about the architectural structures, but then, well, I believe that there can be some footsteps that needs to be well remembered in the minds of Seoulite. So, what are those landmarks? If you can think about that, should I answer your question? You can go first, director. It's a very difficult and important question to raise. 28 years ago, I returned to Korea after long study abroad. Well, at that time, when I realized that a lot of those train railways disappeared, and a lot of old buildings disappeared at that time. So at that time, I tried to find the track of those old buildings, and especially in Gyeongbokgung, Gyeongjeonjeon. Actually, Gyeongbokgung was pretty much blocked from the colonial center of Japan at that time. And well, in the past, well, at that time, we really felt that all of those need to be well preserved and reserved and restored. And at that time, I gave a lot of thought to why do we need to restore them, if we need to restore them, and if we wanted to dismantle or if we decided to dismantle it, why should we dismantle it? So this question I revisited over and over again, and I gave some suggestions to the government. So it was indeed very meaningful discourse at the time. And then afterwards, I became more mature, and I realized that it would be probably better to meet halfway. So let's say we cut the building as only 1 meter high building, and probably we would like to restore and preserve that building to be kept in the memory of all the citizens. So that's what I thought. So I came up with the suggestions to make halfway. So at that time, we had a lot of decision-making related discussion sessions. We delve into what is the meaning behind it and why we should do what we would like to do. So, I mean, in doing so, I believe that we can find the deep meaning of what it is. And when it comes to the unique soulness, what needs to be kept and what needs to be transformed. As far as I remember, it was in 1993. At that time, I wrote an article about what's the new and old that we need to keep. As I saw a lot of old buildings dismantled at that time, what I said was that it's a very easy, quick question for us to dismantle all those old buildings. And by doing so, we just give in the precious things we actually have in old buildings. And now, still, I see those traces of the old value that deserves a lot of credit for the city of Seoul. And if you look at those old buildings, and if you go to like Sangsu area or Hongdae University area, Though there are some unnecessary looking or old buildings there, but now the citizens try to keep them and preserve them. Like Professor Yu said, well, no, I believe it is important to keep them as dynamic and interesting part of the city as places. Of course, there are a lot of issues and problems to be tackled with. Anything that you would like to add, Professor Yu?
고유의 어떤 서울
The unique features of Seoul. Can you talk about that? For example, the unique features of Seoul in the past. Where can you find the glimpses of those? And what has disappeared? Well, I think that when we talk about being uniquely Seoul or being uniquely Korean, when we talk about those topics, I'm very careful to speak because we tend to heavily focus only on the past. Our generation has a responsibility of preserving the past, but at the same time with a responsibility of forging the future. Let's say that we only preserve the past as is. Then our future generation will think that, oh, that generation did nothing. So we have to strike a balance between preserving the past and creating something new. And that balance will determine the characteristic of that society. So then what should we preserve when it comes to the unique features of Seoul? I think that is most important. The world that we see today requires for us to look at this world in a new perspective. For example, Messi, he's a really well-known soccer player and he's really good at dribbling. This player, he uses all of the spaces of a human body, all of the parts. So I think that he has a wide perspective about how to utilize his body and also his surrounding space. So we can't, as laymen who's not experts of soccer, we can't do that. We don't know how to do that, but he's really good at that. So likewise, it's important to preserve the past. But there are some places in Seoul where the sewage system is not fully established. How can we preserve that area in Seoul? Of course, the people from the outside might think that that's very nostalgic and they might want to preserve it. And if you look from afar, everything looks beautiful. But if you are there at the center and you're living in that area, it is not that beautiful. So the things that are not worth preserving, well, you have to change the building, for example, but perhaps the pattern of the alleys should be maintained. So the patterns of the alleys can be preserved, but the other functions of that area can be changed. And Seoul-sanga, the commercial district, is an important heritage of Seoul. If we, however, deconstruct and dismantle Seoul-sanga, the commercial area, and build a public park, what would happen? We would lose an important part of our heritage. So perhaps we can actually maintain the exterior, the facade, and the inner area can be changed. So we really have to widen our perspective and really think largely and think about how we can utilize the different areas of Seoul. So we should divide the different sectors and the areas of Seoul, the different aspects, with a more detailed perspective and change what we have to change, but preserve what we have to preserve. So what we create today can become a unique feature of Seoul in the future. And with that, we have to take the initiative and the ownership of transforming Seoul and preserving Seoul. And also the values of the people who take on that task will be reflected in the outcome. So the city, I think, overall reflects the society, the values and everything. And that is the type of approach that we have to have. Yes. Because Seoul is a fastly changing city, I think that all of what you've mentioned are the unique features of Seoul. Thank you. So we looked into the past and the present of Seoul, and now let's go into the future of Seoul. So that is the third topic, and we will have this discussion with Mr. Ilya. You came from Russia, but in 2016, you were naturalized as a Korean citizen. Is that correct? Yes. So you are a Korean national now. As a foreigner who was born outside of Seoul and outside of Korea, your perspective might have been different from after you were naturalized. So can you talk about that a little bit? And having said that, compared to other global cities, what are the unique features or attractiveness of Seoul? Well, Seoul, as it was mentioned by the two professors, you keep on talking from a architectural theory perspective, but from the view of a foreigner, the space of Seoul as a city actually has to reflect the people of Seoul as a nation. For example, many foreigners, well, not every one of them, but a lot of foreigners, when they come to Seoul, what they compliment about Seoul is a public transportation system, that it's really well built compared to the other cities in Europe or the United States. However, based on my personal experience, the Korean people, they always tend to compare Seoul with cities in Europe and the United States, but I think that's not right because the culture is different, the history is different, the people are different. Even if you do compare Europe with Seoul, the outcomes are so different because the cities are so different. It doesn't mean that Seoul is inferior compared to these global cities, and I don't think that this is a right approach because Seoul has its own unique characteristics, and there is a reason why foreigners come visit Seoul. Of course, if there are some inconveniences experienced by the foreigners, we should listen to their views and try to reflect their views in improving the city functions. But I think that there are these unique attractiveness and features of Seoul, and that reflects the unique features, the past, the culture, and everything of Seoul. Yes, you must be surprised to hear him speak in Korean. He is so fluent in Korean, but he's not just fluent in the Korean language, but also he studied Korean studies, and so he might be more knowledgeable about our country. So what do you see should be the future of Seoul as a city? Well, I think that including Seoul, Korea will be a place where more foreigners will come to live. So personally, I enjoy studying history. I believe that history is very important. And the history of Seoul or the history of Korea has to be reflected in the future of Seoul. For example, let's say that foreigners visit Seoul. We can think about what can be their complaints. And one of that would be that there's not enough that showcases the history of Seoul. For example, Gyeongbokgung and Changdeokgung, aside from these palaces, there are not many experiences of the history of Seoul that people can experience. For example, you talked about the Japanese colonial period, but I think that you should not get rid of the heritage of that period. For example, also, there was a democratization movement. So the history of democracy and the history of colonization, well, you have to preserve the memory to show people that you have overcome the challenges, the difficulties of your history, and that you are thriving. I think that part of the history should be preserved and showcased. Of course, the urban area is a place where there's high density. A lot of people are living in limited space. But you have to think about why so many people are living in such limited space, in such high density, compared to other regions, cities, or other nations. What is the differences? What is the different history? And also in the space that you are living in, what is the most useful and most convenient way to live? What should be the urban space to provide the maximum convenience or maximum level of enjoyable experience for the people dwelling in that space? You have to think about that. People tend to say that Koreans have a hot temper. People want to really drive things in a fast pace. And I think that that aspect of the Korean people are really well reflected in the city of Seoul. Now, redevelopment, I don't really like that word because redevelopment, it could have a positive connotation because it can upgrade a neighborhood for the better. But at the same time, it means that you're destroying a part of history as you redevelop that neighborhood. Let's say that If you dismantle apartment unit and build another apartment unit, that might be okay. However, if you are getting rid of an entire area of the city that has a historical meaning, for example, the headquarters of the Japanese colonial rule, getting rid of that building and building something totally new, or let's say that there was a cultural heritage that had a historical meaning, but getting rid of that and building something new on top of that, on that site, I think that is not the way to go. So I think that as Seoul City goes forward, you have to think about preserving the history, and those kind of discussions should become more promoted. Yes, and also aside from the issue of urban architecture, I would like you to touch upon the topic of the following. Now, the cities are not about the buildings that are built within that space, but the cities are about the energy, the history, and also the people living in that city. So those are all important components and elements of the city. For example, today we tend to say that city is now a global city. And just because foreigners live in that city a lot does not mean that that city is necessarily a global city. And just because our GDP level went up, that doesn't mean that we're a global city. So what would make Seoul a true global city in the future? If Seoul would have to move in that direction in the future, what would make Seoul a more global city? What kind of changes are required among the people to make Seoul a true global city? Well, I think it's quite simple. For example, within a limited space, people are living together. A lot of people are living in that limited space. So I think that if everyone's enjoying a convenient life, then we've met the purpose. And whether it's foreigners or Koreans, it doesn't matter. If all of the people living in that city enjoy a convenient life, then that's good. We are hosting this event and we're talking about the way forward. We're talking about the future of the city. But sometimes you tend to draw the line, Koreans versus non-Koreans, but foreigners, they're the same people. The foreigners residing in Korea require the same services to enjoy a convenient life. They enjoy the same things. They enjoy the same useful resources. We're the same people. So, like you said, just because there are more foreign people living in Seoul doesn't make Seoul a more global city. Regardless of the nationality, the people living in the same space, living in the urban space of Seoul, and enjoying a good life, that would make Seoul a global city. Yes, thank you. That was a very impressive answer. Thank you. So we're talking about preparing Seoul to become a true global city in the future. So now it is time to listen from Mr. Cho Byung-soo in terms of the challenges that Seoul is faced with.
서울의 미래를 위해서
So, what would be the tasks that must be included in the blueprint? When you think about physical environment of Seoul, as others had to say, there are a lot of cutoff and there are a lot of segregations and separations, but we need to go beyond that. We're talking about green city and green corridors and green space. Indeed, Seoul is a small landmass, of course. Now the population is decreasing slowly, fortunately, but it's a dense city indeed. And while maintaining the density of the city, if we can keep and preserve our ecosystem of the nature, then that will be very beneficial for us. And in our history, of course, our ancestors, when they moved the city center from one area to another, they actually take into consideration a lot of different natural environments such as mountain ranges, waterways, and wind breezes. And it's something that we wanted to reflect into our master plan, like multi-layers, for example. When you are on the road, sometimes we see that some of those roads are blocking the seamless flow of the city. And how can we destroy and how can we get rid of those blockage of the city by the road? And that is another area we delve into. And we need to see what needs to be kept and what needs to be changed and what needs to be newly created. And in doing so, I believe that we need to maintain our density of the city, very convenient, but at the same time, we have some unsafe kind of roads and streets, especially for the pedestrians road. I served as a Gwangju Biennale head a long time ago, and there they said that please make a landmark for Lié. What I said was that for that we need to create a pedestrian road, but it was declined from the city government. And having the right parking lots from the pedestrian road and the automobile road, and all such healthy segregation has to take place. And what is the best way for us to make our city usable in multi-layer fashion? And I believe that we will be able to find a solution if we seek out the solution to that. So it is not about getting rid of the old. It is not about creating something brand new. We are not trying to make a very futuristic city without the consideration of the natural environment. And so we would like to look back at our history. There is this nice, healthy trace of human beings with their residential areas. And at the same time, we would like to renew our city. As Professor Yu said, if we identify some problem areas that need to be tackled down, and at the same time, whether it be alleyways or any specific public space or the entrance of the village, if it is worth preserving, then we would like to make some efforts to that end. So having this kind of blueprint in mind, we would like to put together this Biennale. Right. Thank you so much for your comment.
어떤 노력이
Professor Yu, to make Seoul a better city, what kind of efforts are required further? Well, I think that everyone has to make efforts in their own place in the different areas and sectors. For example, the architects. From our perspective, well, if you go outside and look at the beautiful scenery outside, there's the lakes and the mountains. It looks great. We enjoy the scenery. But the scientists, they look at the scenery and they think about the oxygen and also the natural mechanisms that take place within that ecosystem. So they have different perspectives. Having said that, well, because of that, they're the scientists, they're the expert of their fields. What the architects have to focus on is the relationship between the people and their surrounding space. We have to continuously think about the relationships and within what structure or what environment people feel what kind of sentiment. And we have to think about the surrounding environment for the people. But what I want to ask for the people in charge of public administration is that they have to present a more future-oriented vision. I believe that this Biennale is excellent because it talks about the Seoul 100 years from now. It's not about the Seoul a decade from now. When we think about reconstruction, redevelopment, we think about Seoul 10 years from now. But no, at this Biennale, we look at the city 100 years from now. Kennedy, the former president of the United States, he actually focused far beyond the wars that were ongoing at that time. He looked at the moon and he thought about landing man on the moon. When we start to fight over issues that took place 10 years ago, there is no way out of that. We are trapped in that debate. But if we look towards the future with 100 years ahead, then I think that there is so much that we can do. And that is what the leaders should do. They have to think about the 100 years period from now, and they have to present a future-oriented vision, talk about what is needed to go towards that stage in time. So I think that we should stop fighting among the different camps. And I think our society lacks sufficient vision. And that vision should not be a vision for 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but it has to be a vision for 100 years from now. And fundamentally, I think that the Seoul city that we need to create is, for example, we tend to think that we lag behind from other advanced countries, but I don't think the GDP level defines an advanced country. The reason that France is required as an advanced country is because, for example, if there's a tailored jacket, the French tailored jackets are so outstanding, and people think of clothing and apparel when they think of France. And also in the United States, we think about the IT technology, the smart computers, for example. So the advanced countries are where people who create the innovative systems that lead the way towards the future are the advanced countries. So we should stop talking about our income level. That is not what is important. Just because the Squid Game is so popular and also K-pop being popular, that's not that important. What we should have done is not build programs like Squid Game, but rather we should have built the platform like Netflix. So we have to think about something unique to Seoul that can only exist within Seoul, but at the same time we have to build new systems within Seoul and make that system something that other cities want to benchmark. We have to generate wisdom from that system that we built in Seoul. So we have to ensure that 10 million people in the city can coexist with nature in harmony. And if we have that vision and if we have that solution, it would be the same, identical to the innovation that took place back in Paris when they came up with a sewage system for the first time. So I think that when it comes to the urban space and architecture, we need that kind of innovative system. Yes, thank you very much. So we talked about the past, the present, and the future of Seoul, and it was indeed a very interesting debate and discussion that we just carried out. So now it is time to talk about the future 100 years of Seoul with the citizens of Seoul. It's time to listen to the views of the citizens. And
How about citizen journalists or college student reporters? If you have any questions, please raise them. Do you have any questions? Please raise your hand if you have any. Okay, please deliver the microphone back there. Okay, please introduce yourself and please let me know who you would like to give question to. My name is Jung Won-ki and I would like to give this question to Director Cho and Professor Oh. And now this Songhyun-dong site is going to be open to the general public. And what are you going to do to experience and enjoy this special site along with the Korean public? I am an architect, but I am also part of the public, right? So this Songhyun-dong site, I couldn't see what's within it because it was surrounded by the fence. But now I can go right in the middle of the site so that I think I can renew my perspective from inside to out, not outside to in like before. And also we can cross across this Songhyun-dong area when we go to those city urban site, so it's going to be really nice. How about Director Joe? Having the preparation for Biennale, I tried to make most of this site, and I had some words with architects and also artists around the world. And this is wide open area, and this is indeed a very valuable area in Seoul. And maybe we can put together a lot of great events here and enjoyed by the general public. Of course, one of the museums will be located into this site. But nevertheless, if you think about this whole area of Songhyun-dong site, I believe that we can leave off some of those areas as the area for the enjoyment of the public with a little bit of infrastructure like electricity, water, and also public restroom areas as well. So this can be a true space, true open space for the public of Seoul. Having minimum level of infrastructure, you go there, enjoy yourself, surrounded by the nature. It's almost like a backyard in Korean traditional history, I guess. Another question, please.
좀 전달해 주십시오.
Can you please hand over the microphone to the person sitting in the front row? Yes, good afternoon. I am Kim Soo-won, and I'm in public administration. I am in the housing sector, and we talk about the next 100 years for the Biennale. Of course, there's an issue related to politics, economy, society, but there are a lot of young people here, and I would like to ask, well, I used to study about 20 years ago in the U.S., and the professor asked, "What is your eyesight?" But that was 20 years ago, and already that time it wasn't that good. And also, if the situation, well, we have to have a better eyesight, we have a better perspective. But anyhow, if you look at the density of the city also, over the years it has greatly changed, and a lot of the city has changed a lot. So when we try to predict what will happen in 100 years, it will be very difficult. Now, Mr. Ilya, you have been naturalized as a Korean citizen. I think, well, everything will change a lot in the next 100 years. How should we prepare ourselves for the changes? There will be a lot of empty homes, for example. And right now, the young people are concerned about finding housing for themselves. But there will be increasing number of empty homes. So when it comes to architecture and also the urban space, how should we prepare for the upcoming 100 years? So that was a question related to population density. The birth rate is going down. And I think that the professor talked about the 100 years. And when we think about the next centennial, of course, we have to think about the density and the population issue. Yet if there are no people that live in the city, then that would actually make the city empty and hollow. And I think that from a long-term perspective, the paradigm of the city will change. But I think that the principles and the economic structure will be maintained, just as there is a widening gap between the rich and the poor. Also, within the urban areas, there will be empty houses in some neighborhoods. But in Seoul, particularly, I don't think that there will be a lot of empty homes in the neighborhoods of Seoul. Of course, there might be a decrease in the number of houses, but nevertheless, I actually think that there will be an increase in the population and the people living here, because when we think about the international status and international relations, that can be a possibility. I saw on the news this morning that the refugees of Africa took a boat and went to Italy, but they were not allowed inside the country. And so for 3 weeks, they had to stay on the boat, and then today, only 140 people were able to land on Italy, the Italian territory. So depending on the international order and relations, things will change. But I do believe that there's a lot of people in Africa, and they're going to Europe, and they can actually become the majority later on if the number of Africans living in Europe increases. And that might have to be the way to go. We might have to share. If there is a beautiful, lovely city, I think that there's a possibility of sharing, and we should be able to share, to invite people over and live in our city. So we need the nature as is, but at the same time, we need the habitat for the people to dwell in. And that should be the direction forward. Of course, the cities within the regions outside of the metropolitan area will decrease, and they might disappear. But I think that that will not be the case for Seoul. Based on our ancestors' wisdom, well, if it's not needed, then perhaps there is a need for that area to disappear, that thing to disappear. So if we think about the structures that are not needed, then we have to think about how we can reduce those unneeded spaces and structures. But at the same time, if there is necessary infrastructure, then we should create that. And also restoring nature. Those are things that we need in this city. Yes, thank you very much. So, is there anything more to add? If not, then let's go on to the next question. Yes, please hand over the mic.
네. 일어서셔서 말씀하시면 더 좋을 것 같습니다.
Okay. Would it be okay if you stand up, please? Well, I am part of college student reporters. My name is Cha Yujin, and I would like to give this question to Director Cho. Well, the uniqueness of Seoul yesterday, is it well intertwined with Seoul's present? And also, how will it be implemented in the future as well? I think it is a tough question to answer. Yesterday I said, yesterday's Seoul and today's Seoul, the relationship between the two. I actually talked about that. And there is a little bit of mismatch in terms of the harmony, especially the natural environment side of that. And everyone shares the same view. That is why going forward, the natural environment part of the issue will be improved going forward. And there are a lot of beauty and natural scenic site and landscape will be further improved going forward. It's not just because of the Biennale we are about to host, but also it's everyone's shared interest, I believe. And so we have been able to hear from those experts. And I believe that we need to look ahead, having very careful eyes and moves toward that. Then I believe that we need to be well thought out in crafting and implementing our plan for the future. What was your second question? Please use the microphone. About Songhyun-dong, you mean? The Songhyun-dong site, I believe that there are a lot of improvement to be made. Like a year ago, there was a little bit of hillside to that, and it's Songhyun-dong, which means it's a pine tree hill, and that is what it means in China's character of Songhyun-dong. And this pine forest prevent a lot of mishaps and bad things from happening, and with this pine tree hills. So until last year, there was a little bit of hillside left, but then, and up until last year, we had some traces of the traditional past. And then a decision was taken to make it more flat. But for me personally, whether it be like old buildings of 1960s or 70s or 80s, it is important to revisit the meanings of those old buildings. If some of those were well preserved and kept, then it might have been even better, even though they were not built in the Japanese colonial rule or even before. So I believe that it is important for us to review the topographic characteristics of the land sites for research. And I'm just telling you from my heart, and this is my personal opinion. As curator Kim Sara mentioned, in the city center of Seoul, there was this Songhyun-dong well hidden and preserved. And it is indeed a wonder and surprise for us. It is very important heritage site for all of us. So based on a lot of ideation as well as discussion and debate, we need to find ways to keep and restore this area, I believe.
있을까요?
There are a lot of university reporters here today. Do we have another question? Yes, I think that there's one in the front and one in the back. Why don't we start with the person in the front? Let's receive that question and then go to the back. Yes, I am Go Yujin of Architen, which is a group of university students studying architecture. I also have a question for Professor Yu. Now, in the old streets generated over the years within the city of Seoul, people feel that there's great attractiveness and there are unique features for Seoul. But there are the issue of safety, for example. It's not just attractiveness that these streets hold, but also there are some issues related to safety. So how can we preserve this to ensure that the attractiveness is enjoyed, but at the same time we can ensure the safety of the people enjoying the streets? Well, if let's say that there's a fire and you need a fire truck to put out the fire, of course, it would be right, like you said, to get rid of the streets. But actually, we can use a small firefighting robots, or we can come up with anti-fire systems that we can utilize. So I think that if we come up with the right innovative systems, then we can solve these issues. So I think in some sense, we continue to focus on these new challenges, but we try to attempt and implement these solutions that are not right with the different for these questions. For example, you're trying to solve a differential integral calculus, but you're trying to implement a solution with a quadratic equation approach. So right now there's over 200 cities with population of 10 million. So we have to come up with the right industrial ecosystem for cities of that scale, a system unique to Seoul, and then export such innovative systems to these cities outside of Korea. Yes, instead of the fire trucks, we can use the fire robots, we can utilize the drones for firefighting. These could be the new aspects that we have not imagined about that we might see in the future of Seoul.
기자는 아니고요.
I'm not a citizen reporter, but I am a field architect, and I would like to give you more concrete question. Professor Yu said that it is important to create a platform like Netflix that will be quite helpful. And now, the Seoul metropolitan government and related government agencies are trying very hard. And if you look at 2023 housing plan, they would like to improve and increase the green areas. At the same time, they would like to have the floor areas to be increased if they are ensured more green areas. So I believe that this kind of plan is more workable, and we will have more green space for the city, and that would be beneficial for the whole city, I believe. And linking those green corridors wise, this is more beneficial, I believe. But as an architect myself, if the floor area becomes more dense, then that will be pretty much challenging for the architect to come up with a building. And within the city center areas, if there are too many high-rise buildings, that is not a way to go. And by securing a lot of green land inside those city center area, how can we strike a balance between the green area as well as those dense buildings? Well, I would like to give you some answers related to the Biennale themes. Well, it's a great question indeed. How can we have more green areas and also secure the floor areas? Then that means we need to have more high-rise buildings. For me personally, high-rise building is better than having low-rise buildings in an expanded manner. But what we are saying is that application of the floor area or floor to land area needs to be more adjusted, meaning that we have automobile road, and then on top of that, we can create more green areas. And also underneath that, we have more residential buildings. So, here, let's say if there is some kind of incentive provided to the right floor to land ratio, then while we are we are constructing more buildings. At the same time, we can secure more green areas on top of those buildings or on top of those roads. So there can be a lot of different areas and ways to think about. I believe that we need to think more about what would be the best ways to make that happen. And actually, we indeed have a preliminary discussion with the Seoul metropolitan government, and they positively accepted our first suggestion. Of course, if we make everything better, then that would be great, but it may be not feasible, whether it be incentive systems in place or some other motivations to be made. We need to think about a lot of different ways to be implemented. So we are in the exploration phase right now, I guess.
Professor Yu, do you have anything to add? Well, Mr. Cho, I think that he's really well covered this question. But I don't know. Well, it's not an easy or simple issue. I talked about the systems, but what I meant was that the attempts for the 2030, rather than that, I was thinking about the technical approaches for finding the solution. And I don't think that one single solution will solve all of the challenges that Seoul is faced with. At this stage, everything that comes up, the ideas, should be tested. Saying that it won't work or it will work, even before trying it, that's worthless. So we really have to just test things out. Try one thing in one neighborhood, try it in another neighborhood, try different things. And everything is not about plus and minus. There's also root, there's also multiplication, there's division. There are more complex algebra issues, for example. So I think that even before we've started, sometimes we tend to just engage in discussions and then say that is not possible and not make any efforts. But we really have to start doing something in order to achieve outcome. I mean, if you have your brakes on and not doing anything and not use your GPS, unless you use your GPS, you don't know whether your navigation is working or not. So you really have to try. So all of a sudden, we have so many different questions coming out. So let's receive the next question. Yes, please stand. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Chung Min-ju from Architen, and I have a question for Mr. Jo Byung-soo, the General Director. Now, in your view, well, you talked about the unique beauty of Korea and Korea being related to the ground and also the multi-layers. But what is the unique aspect of Seoul and the attractiveness and beauty of Seoul? The unique beauty of Korea, the unique characteristics of Korea, and also thinking about how we should create the Seoul of the future is actually different topics. But when we think about the unique aspects of Korea, I think I wrote a piece about being tied with the land of Korea, and that's reflected in my architectural work. That is right. But when we focus on the city of Seoul, well, ever since the beginning of Seoul, the mountain lines and the rivers have been maintained, and they will continue to exist. So they enable Seoul to have the potential to be a very beautiful city. And we have this natural setting that cannot be found anywhere else in different cities around the world. So that makes Korea unique. We have the basic infrastructure, here meaning the natural environment in place already. So with that, we want to focus on urban land and urban architecture. So when we talk about land, it's not just about the ground, but also the trees and the ecosystems on the land. And also then how we're going to build the infrastructure beneath the land, beneath the ground level, and how we're going to develop the ground level. So having said that, we're not just trying to solve the challenges in a physical manner, but also think about the unique characteristics of Seoul that had existed from way in the past, try to preserve such unique aspects, identify these unique features, and try to actually accommodate them into the future of Seoul so that we can really make it special and a unique feature of Seoul and Korea. So we're talking about the unique features of Seoul and Korea, but I have a question for Mr. Ilya.
보실 수 있어요.
Probably you may have a different perspective on this specific subject, and you also studied Korean in Korea. So, what do you think is the definition of unique characteristics of Seoul and Korea? Well, everything exists in Korea. Everything that exists in Korea has some unique characteristics as Seoulness. And if you look at the Eiffel Tower, we shouldn't fall onto that trap. Like, for example, in Paris, there's Eiffel Tower and there's Big Ben in the UK, and liberty of freedom in the United States. So only when we have those great landmarks, we can feel that we do have unique characteristics of Seoulness. However, from people abroad, they would like to pay a visit to Korea to feel and look the Seoulness in the air and in the atmosphere. Therefore, I don't think it is necessary to try to show off what is within us as the unique characteristics of Seoul or Korea. We have dense apartment complex, and we do have this Gyeongbokgung, and then it is surrounded by great mountain ranges, including Namsan, and all of those can be very unique characteristics of Seoul. So we don't have to try to go overboard to try to unnaturally put together something in Korea as a landmark of Korea or landmark of Seoul. I don't think it is that necessary.
였던 것 같은 생각.
Yes, thank you very much. That was a very accurate point and a very good point that you made. Why don't we receive the next question? As many people are raising hands, let's make the question and answer both very concise because of the time constraint. Yes, thank you very much. My name is Heo Bo-kyung from Architen, and it's related to the past two questions, but I have a question for the two architects. Now, the theme of the Seoul Biennale is urban land and urban architecture. So, if what's being uniquely Seoul is related to the land, then what you mentioned is, well, you said that if you're going to build a new land on top of the existing land, what should be the unique features of the new land? What should be inherited from the existing land to make that new land uniquely Seoul-like as well? Wow. Well, it seems like you two have a very good relationship. You're saying that you should go ahead. Well, I think that just like Professor Yu mentioned, you have to really take a deep dive into this. What are the challenges related to the skyscrapers? And also, when we think about the urban architecture and we want to revive and maintain the land, does it mean that we should not build skyscrapers? That is not it. We have to ensure that the land remains useful for us, for the ecosystem, and also that everything functions well. For example, the lower grounds should be functionable and the regulations have to be appropriate, but at the same time, the upper levels have to play a good function as well. So as it was mentioned by Professor Yu, perhaps we should think about the gardens that can be created and ensure that we have this communication with nature. We have to think about the fundamentals. We have to think about the functions. We have to think about the ecosystem within that space when we create a new land on top of the existing land. So I think we were just talking about the methodology that could be utilized in terms of utilizing multi-layers for creating new land. Thank you. We have another person who raised his hand, yes, and another person in the back. So if you stand, we will hand over the microphone to you.
네, 학생 기사단의
My name is Jo Hong-rae, college student reporter. Thank you very much for your presentation. And as an architecture major, I would like to give you this question. We're talking about the past, present, and future of Seoul's architecture. And when we think about the past, present, and future, I believe that there is some type of flow incorporated into that. So, what is it that you would like to explore more? Would you like to give that question to all three presenters? Whoever can answer my question, please. Okay, then Ilya, could you go first? Answering the question. Professor Yu and Ilya. Well, I didn't quite get the question. What was the question? What is the role of architects in this world? To link past, present, and future of architecture. In my opinion, our role is very multifaceted. It's not like a single job given to us. Design architect has their own role, and corporations have their own unique role. So everyone is given a distinctive role. What I'm interested in is, in order to make successful architectural structures, you need to have the right company that plays an order to you. And if it is a public space, then the general public is the player that plays an order to architectural structures. And it is not just about property market or real estate. So that is why I run my YouTube, Sherlock Holmes Architecture. So that is why you have to give likes to my YouTube, and you need to subscribe to my channel. I see. Because that really gives me the energy to move forward with it. So what I'm saying is that especially when I meet with politicians, it really helps. They don't listen attentively to what I have to say, but if I'm supported by a lot of people, followers, then they open up their ears. It's very unique. In these days, right now I have a lot of male subscribers to it, and especially for the articles that I write, I have a lot of female fans there. But what I'm saying is that we need to become more mature looking at those architecture as the general public. My son is always talking about how to play a good role game. But then when the maturity of the general public looking at the architecture evolves and elevated, then that will be really helpful for the future of architecture. Okay, so they need to subscribe to your channel first on the YouTube. What is the role of architect for you? Well, I am not a person or an expert in the architectural field, but I do agree with what Professor Yu said. Well, people feel that architecture is like another noun of property market in Korea. But then when it comes to architecture, there are a lot of artistic part to it. And we have a lot of people living in the city as a community. And then, if a building is really built in the favor of people's use and so on, then, the architecture will become the right one. And aesthetic part of it is well reflected into architecture. If that is the case, then that would be really nice.
Yes, please raise your hand so that we can hand over the microphone to you. Yes, please stand and speak into the microphone. Can you hear? Let's give you another microphone. Yes, well, I have a question related to what was mentioned, architecture and also landscaping and the cities. When there are clashes of values, I think that you have to choose among the different clashing values. What values should you stand by then in such cases is something that we have to think about. mentioned that the values selected by or chosen by the public might not be necessarily good, but it might be popular. So when it comes to decision making, well, I think that what the architects select is very important. But how do you strike a balance among the different values and ensure that you maintain the uniqueness of Seoul? That is my question to you. Yes, please go ahead. I'm not sure whether this will answer your question, but well, I think that architects, well, this is something that I thought of when I was very young. I was a student. Well, this studio professor had a totally different style compared to my style. So we continuously clashed. And a senior told me, a colleague told me at that time, that by the end of the year, if you find a solution that satisfies you and the professor both, then that means that you have grown. You have become more sophisticated. And I think that one of the values of architect would be to be able to come up with a creative solution, because then you can satisfy everyone. If you try to, well, rather than the attitude of trying to persuade the other person with your idea without bending your views, I think you have to find a third way forward where you can accommodate all of the views and satisfy everyone. You should not be rigid and think that your values are always the right values. Yes, the two of you. I think it's time to wrap up the discussion. So the other two discussants, if you have anything to say, perhaps you can also give some closing remarks.
질문 속에
Well, today, among the questions, there were so many good, significant issues raised, and also in the answers also, we were able to realize many things that we had neglected in the past. So thank you. And in particular, the question that we just heard right now, what architects can do. I think that the answer was great in terms of some of the limitations and what can be done. So that, having said that, I think that the Biennale is really important because we're hosting it at Songyundong. A lot of people will participate, and the bridge exhibition of the students will be hosted there. The reason that we hold it there is because it will help people better understand. So people will think, oh, I thought the bridges were only for automobiles, but we can use the bridges for this. So we can establish a common understanding and promote the interests of the people in this topic. Maybe 3 or 4 people can gather together, drink soju, and talk about the bridge that connects the city together. That is a biennale that I dream of. Yes, so why don't we take turns and say closing remarks? Well, what I realize these days is that there are a lot of gamers in Korea, whether it's role-play games, there are many different types of games. And the people who play games, well, I think that religion is quite similar when you think about the games that they play. Because the people who participate in the games, they share the same values. For example, whether it's the marble fans or fans of a certain game, they have a community where they share the same values and the beliefs. That is why they have the same goals and they are concerted together. So the architects, they tend to try to spread their views and their values to other people because of the profession. The architects try to look into the future and the aspects of a city or a building that people tend to not focus on. Because if you build a building, that will be about 2 to 3 years ago until the construction is finished. And that is why the architects constantly think about 2 to 3 years from now. And they continuously want to share that future vision with other people. So the Biennale, inspired by the architects, well, whether it's the general director or other curators, what we want to do here is to share our values and our views. And if there are more people who participate and come on board, that means that that view, that value that we have, the vision for the future has a better chance to be realized. It could be a major religion if there's a massive gathering and followers, like lineage game. And perhaps that can drive our society to advance for the better. A lot of people here, well, I think that there are about 100 people gathered in this space, and we are sharing this time and space together. I think that this is just a wonderful beginning of our journey, and I do hope that we can continue to repeat this. So, architecture can help us share our values and visions for the future 100 years of Seoul. Thank you very much.
교수님이
And yes, I share the view with what Professor Yu said. Well, actually, Seoul is indeed a very great place to live in. And especially if you have experience of living abroad, you would know for sure Seoul is indeed a great place to live in. And we are looking ahead 100 years and 200 years. What type of city we would like to live in? What does that look like? When you contemplate on this, you will kind of get close to your answers. And you think about what is needed for the Seoul Lights 10 years from now. And some of those kind of questions need to be well delved into. As the professor said, we need our purpose, and we need to have a talk about the purpose and surrounding it. And what I'm saying is that I believe that we need more discussions around those important agendas. Thank you very much.
So we engaged in this long discussion. Thank you very much. Personally, of course, I'm not a specialist in architecture, but when it comes to architecture, well, as you know, the world that we live in has become less humane because we use more machines and technologies, and the relationships among the human beings, people, has become more distant. But as we experienced the pandemic, we thought about these relationships and also our role in society. Personally, I do believe that the role of the people who study and specialize in urban space has become more important. And in my view, this event day was really significant because we had the citizens, the experts, the people preparing for the Biennale gathering together, exchanging frank views, asking questions, and really gathering the different ideas together. So the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism 2023 will be hosted next year. It will be hosted soon, and so we don't have a lot of time remaining. We will have to really put in our best efforts for the preparation so that we can ensure that we can really show the outstanding aspects of Seoul and also really promote the vision for the next 100 years. And this was a good opportunity to look at our efforts and also look at the themes as well. Yes, thank you. Well, the Seoul City Biennale team and many people have really put together a lot of efforts to make this possible. So this was a short event, but nevertheless, many people had to put in a lot of efforts to host this. So from A and a lot of people, there are a lot of staff members who really contributed. I thank you all and all of the participants. I do hope that you will continue to support us so that we can successfully host the SBAU 2023. Thank you. So, for the successful hosting of the SBAU 2023, we hosted the Pre-Biennale. This concludes the event. Thank you for your participation.